Hi, I'm Vicki, this is Sarah and Jenny, and we're from the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and we're here to share with you a little bit about what we've been working on in terms of content strategy and putting stories first. So our old website was a good website, had some great content. However, it didn't really have a cohesive identity. Probably a lot of you are familiar with the ongoing debate of, do we focus on the visitor who's coming to the museum and going to physically be here and their experience? Do we focus on the people that may never come here? What's the balance between the two? And so that's an ongoing discussion. But as evidenced by our old website homepage, it had a little bit of a mixed identity. And the stories that we wanted to tell and the stories that we found people really were interested in were somewhat buried. The site really served people who knew what they were looking for, who knew our content, who had a little bit of insider knowledge into how we used our terminology and our organizational structure. And so it wasn't really serving people who were interested in stories. We knew from sharing some stories buried in the site on social media and then stories that our experts were putting out through our blog that that was what people were really interested in. And so we thought about how could we elevate this, how could we think differently, and we decided when the opportunity came to redo our website that we were going to flip this model and we were going to put stories first. So the new website put stories first. Right on the homepage, the very first thing you're going to see are stories that we share. And unlike previously, where our blog was pretty much looked at as one story at a time, we can do multiple stories. We can interthread them. They're organized by topics, and people can explore our content based on their own interests rather than have to look for a specific object and find a great story buried there. This has really unified us across our digital platforms. So now stories drive our brand new app, GoFlight, download in the App Store or Google Play. Basically, stories are the engine that drive our new app, and this is what we hope will be the way to engage our audiences who don't come to the museum, who have the app, and every time they open it, that's the first thing they're going to see if you're not in the museum. If you're in the museum, the first thing you'll see are interactive maps and what's around you, and you can still see the stories, but it really very much serves the on-site visit. But when you leave, there's actually a motivation to reopen the app and remain connected to the museum through the stories that we want to share. So this has been a really great strategy for us because it also unifies with how we engage the public in sharing their stories. We've always been interested in hearing from our visitors and some of the amazing stories that they share. We learn a lot from them, and it tailors and guides the types of stories we then want to tell, and we're always looking for new ways to get toward this model of co-creation with our audiences. But now that we're all using a common terminology and a common framework, we've unified how we also collect stories from the visitor, and Sarah's going to talk a lot about that. So the other impact that it's had for us internally is it's really changed how we collaborate around content and storytelling. With what used to be a process of each individual office thinking about the stories they want to tell for their particular program or whatever channel they use to reach the public, those were fairly independent efforts. And you would even have instances where one guest was visiting the museum and 3 or 4 different departments would want to hit them up for an interview. And that didn't seem like a very cohesive or efficient strategy. And so when we decided to put story first, we now have a much better model where groups from different offices get together, they talk about, okay, what are the stories we want to tell, and what's the most efficient way that we can do that, both in terms of interacting with the storytellers, but then also how we can engage the public. And we think about ways now that how can we get stories back from our audiences relevant to this content. So we're doing a lot more to think about our audiences than we used to because we're now collaborating more effectively. And then we can decide which platforms, what formats, what's the best way to get these stories out and keep people connected with us. So this has really been a useful shift for us. It's still an experiment in play. It's just started July 1. So now Jenny's going to share with you kind of how it's been going.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts and how we put this thing together. The very first thing and the most exciting for me as the content person was we took our WordPress blog and we migrated everything into the new website. So all those fantastic stories that we've had over the years are now findable. They're now part of this backbone of our website, and for me, that was really exciting. So now we have, I think we migrated over 500 blog posts. So how do you organize all this content, the stories with the collections, with the exhibitions? And so we had to come up with an organization strategy, and we decided to do a flat taxonomy, and our big goals were really to, one, remove departments from how we were scheming our structure. So you won't find education, you won't find archives in our taxonomy, and we didn't want people to have to guess what departments were doing what to find what they wanted. We wanted to make sure that we used terms that everyone could understand and that you wouldn't have to be a rocket scientist to find things.
But it doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt. Nothing against rocket scientists. So we ended up with still about 100 different terms, and this is because, again, this has to jive with our collections. So we did some visitor testing, and we were trying to figure out what topics kind of bubbled up to the top. And it wasn't too surprising. It was actually really nice because it kind of confirmed what we thought. So our visitors said there were about 5 topics: aviation, space, exploration, behind the scenes, popular culture, and then we have top stories. Those are the things they said they would want to hear more about, that they would be willing to click on. And so you'll see on our website we've elevated those to the top, and we're using this as a way for our visitors to personalize the content that they're getting. So on the web, people can subscribe to those topics and receive monthly emails, and they're only going to get aviation stories if they click aviation. On our app, the first thing that happens as you load it is you're asked to choose the topics you're most interested in, and then there's a feed that just shows you stories based on that. And push notifications are also only geared to the topics you want. So it's a really nice way for us to give people what they're interested in. And I think also, I hope if you don't know what you're interested in, this organization strategy will help you kind of find stuff that you didn't know you wanted to find. So we joke internally, the goal of this too was also to get people to come back to our stuff. We didn't want them to come once and then never come back. We wanted them to keep coming back. So if you are really into space and you come back a week later, we wanted you to see new content. And we joke internally that we created a content monster that we needed to feed and feed and feed and feed. And so we went from publishing about 2 to 3 times a week. Largely, our curators were responsible for creating these really fantastic stories. But to fill in all those other days, we had to kind of become more creative. And that's, Vicki touched on it, it's really changed how we worked internally. And that's been really incredible. We've become more flexible, more agile. And there's just a lot of excitement over, we've opened the door to everyone to be a content creator. And so what ends up happening is we kind of have something that keys us off. So it could be a program, an exhibition, a speaker's coming into town, and then as Vicki said, we all kind of go, well, what's the story? And we squeeze as much content as we can out of all these opportunities. And then, we don't think of it as just, okay, well, let's do a traditional blog post. It's more, what's the best way to tell the story? Maybe it's Facebook Live. Maybe we do some audio and we use it in a podcast later. So it's really just being flexible. And we still have our curator-authored posts, which are really, people still want that. So we're still experimenting. We're still playing with different content types and seeing what works. So the other way, I don't know how well you can see this, but the other way we are feeding this monster is exhibitions. So probably like a lot of you, and like the physical exhibition, we would do all this work on the back end to build an online presence. It would have its own look and feel, and then on opening day we would launch it, and then it would be done. So we'd have some nice buzz for a couple days, and then it was like, oh man, all that work. So this is our plan. This is the new strategy. So along this timeline of exhibition, the work from the idea to collecting objects, we want our exhibition teams to think about what stories can I tell based on the work I'm already doing. So I collected a new object, let me share that. And so all this related content can live on an exhibition page, even before it opens. So we're kind of building buzz. When we proposed this to the curators, they were on board. We have a really supportive staff, but they still kind of felt like they needed that online curated exhibition. And so we said, okay, we can do that. We can make that happen for you, but we're going to serialize it. So along this line, at some point you have an exhibition script. We'll take the script, we'll look at it, and we'll pull out standalone stories, what will stand on its own. And from the time we have the script to the time we open, we are going to slowly release all of those stories. So the core of this exhibition is going to slowly come out. And we've built into the back end an ability to then, after the fact, go in and say, okay, I want a section 1, and I want to grab this story, and this story, and this story, and then section 2, let me grab these stories. So when we go to opening day, we still have this curated online exhibition, but then we still have the means to have related content to keep feeding this gorgeous yellow monster.
So as Vicki mentioned earlier, our audiences have shared, for years, like great stories about how they're connected to the stories that we're telling. And in the past, we've had very siloed, in different spots on our website, places to collect those. And that was kind of inefficient for us. It would lead to this sort of short-term, project-based kind of story collection. People were sharing great stories, personal connections on our social media platforms, but there wasn't a central place to collect those and reflect them back to people to show that we really do value their contributions and want to make those part of what we're doing. So for our new website, we consolidated that all into one spot that is the Share Your Story section of the website. And within that, there are different topics. So as new projects, new initiatives come along, we can create very quickly a prompt around a topic, and that's an option for people as they're sharing their stories. And here are just a few examples of how a few different topics where people have shared the really incredible impacts of visiting the museum or of Star Trek. And that's been really great to see that people are using this. And we've got now one central place to point them to, and then from our, the back-end management point of view, it's very simple. I'm not logging into a whole bunch of different systems to get those approved and reflected back on the website. And then, so now that we're publishing so many different stories, about one a day, that's changed the social media model as well. It used to be that we'd have maybe 2-3 stories a week that I would kind of summarize in a social media friendly way and put out there to people. And now it's a lot more content. So we're kind of figuring out how to fit that into the social media workflow. It gives us a lot more content to share, which is great. It diversifies what we're doing on social media. We're also trying to really put in audience engagement into as many of these stories as possible. So the example here on the left is a story about our Art of the Airport Tower photo exhibition. And Jenny had worked on a story with the curator about what she saw when she looked at these airport towers. And so I asked people on social, what do they see when they look at this? Like, our curator sees Swiss cheese, and we got some great answers with that. We also have been doing a caption, I guess, kind of call for captions, and each week we're putting out an image that is kind of a mystery image. In some cases, we really don't know much about the background of the image, and getting people to think about what might be going on here. So really inviting their thoughts and their participation. So how am I measuring the impacts? I'm looking at the number of stories that have been shared since our launch. So we've gotten this, I mean, this number is a few days old now, so I think we're closer to 90 stories. About 50 of those are about Star Trek. And that was a major, that was a big push for us. We're also on social media in terms of our metrics, kind of shifting to reporting on this new number that we're calling the engagement rate, which comes from looking at kind of the averages of likes, comments, and shares on posts across our primary social platforms per 1,000 followers. So this is a number that we can look at year after year, and it's not, we can say if it's going up, it's actually going up. That's what's great about the relative number, is that it's not going up it's not our following grows every year. So kind of making this a number that we can really compare year to year gives us a much better sense of, is the story first strategy that's driving our website, app content, and into social, does that result in greater engagement?
So we have this model that we've begun to use, and it's just beginning. This is since July 1 that the numbers Sarah quoted. So it's not quite one story a day from the public, but it's almost that average. And we hope that that's going to just increase as people become aware that we're interested in hearing from them. We also hope that our engagement process gets more deeply into the content that our curators are developing for the exhibitions, and some of the feedback and stories that we get from the public would directly influence some of the things that we're doing inside the museum and create that kind of feedback loop where we're approaching more of an outside-in type of model at our museum. So we have a lot of aspirations for this. We're looking forward to iterating on it and seeing how well it works. We also are, planning next steps such as storytelling workshops for staff, and thinking about how we tell stories and ways we can be more engaging. So it's just the beginning of a grand experiment. So we purposely left a lot of time for Q&A and discussion because we wanted to hear what people think about stories and museums, and about this model, about what they're doing and how they're thinking about storytelling. It's a pretty hot topic these days. Everybody I individually talk to, they're like, oh yeah, we're thinking about that too. So just want to open it up to discussion. If anybody has thoughts, questions? Liz.
I've obviously talked to almost all of you about this. I'm really excited, and I just wonder, in terms of volume of content and of stories. So you say that now it's about one a day. Is that the right amount? So you know it's the right amount? Would more be better, or would that actually diminish returns, or like what is like the goal in 3 years to? Or what do you think that level is?
Yes. So, as Sarah can attest to on social, sometimes publishing more is not the best plan. And so to answer it, I'm not sure yet. So the goal right now is to publish one a day and then take a look at our numbers and just see, did that turn people away or did that interest people? Maybe it's quality over quantity. Our big goal, though, too, is also, and when in selling this to our staff, was that this isn't BuzzFeed. So even if we do a listicle, it's going to have some really core content. And part of the reason for the increase, too, is to make sure that if someone has subscribed to space, aviation, exploration, that there's content for them. So that means we have to kind of fill those buckets with different stories. And that's just, trying to get that every week is a numbers game. So we'll see, and we'll share, because I'm interested to see, is it too much? Is it too little? So to be determined. In the back.
Yeah, outside of your really robust and beautiful new web channel, what are some of the social channels that you're interacting with on that very frequent basis?
Okay, social channel question.
So we have, we kind of divide our social channels into primary platforms and secondary platforms, and the engagement rate that I talked about, that's looking at our 3 primary platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're also on Google+, Pinterest. We do some Periscope, Flickr, but we focus our efforts really in looking at how we're performing on our primary channels.
Is anybody else pursuing a story model of similar ilk out there? You are?
Yes, but our museum is pretty large and it's been around for a long time, so it's taken a little while to make the shift.
Which museum?
Detroit Institute of Arts.
Detroit Institute of
So
Art.
it's heavily audience-driven. We focus on audience.
Ah, very good. All right, we'll have to check it out.
Yeah, one of the, I think, keys to this being successful is one, Vicki and our leadership has been very supportive, and really there's the freedom to fail, which has been wonderful. So we can take some risks and say, let's throw this up there, see how it does, and if it flops, we learn something. And so being in that kind of environment has been really helpful for this. And overall, our institution has been very supportive. So.
Yeah, and just to give you an example of one of the ways we kind of rally around an event or an activity, we had the 50th anniversary of Star Trek recently. You may have heard about it. Any Star Trek fans? The curator's here. I'm calling her out. Taking names. We got together and we said, okay, obviously there's some really great stories here and there's some things we can do. How can we elevate the app? How can we elevate these stories? How can we all coordinate and do something interesting together? And we had an opportunity, thanks to the curator and some other folks, to interact with the man who invented Klingon language, basically. And he actually was local, and so he came in and recorded our highlights tour on the app in Klingon. And so we were able to put that on the app, are able to do these things really quickly. We can add new tours. We did a Pokemon tour too, right? You had to respond to that. But the Star Trek Klingon tour was a big hit. We had our PR folks who were working on it with us, so they were able to get some lift in the press for it and some attention to the app. And honestly, our numbers for app downloads just skyrocketed for that period of time. So we feel like that convergence and leveraging all of our different areas and channels together at once is a really effective approach, and we can all benefit from that combination.
I have a question about your application. Do you have any data that reflects or knowledge of are people keeping the application or is one day thing that they deleted and forgot about it?
We can look at that to see how often, how recently people are coming back and how many times. So we're still kind of delving into that data and trying to see what it really means. We're also doing on an ongoing basis evaluation of the app, and we've already made some tweaks to it, looking at kind of hunches we had as we got it out there, that maybe this feature would be more clear to people if we changed its name. We thought of a really clever name for one part of it that was about like the objects that were near you, and we called it At the Museum. And that 6 people gave me 6 different definitions of what that section was about. So obviously that wasn't working. We changed it to objects near me, and then the results completely flipped.
The reopen rate for the app right now is about 42%, so we do know that. Yeah. I think this hand was up first. Sorry, we'll get to you.
Hi, congratulations, I think it's great.
Thank you.
What does success look like for you guys here? I guess in understanding sort of the context of, I see the broadcast of the stories, but I'm curious about sort of audience development or engagements in terms of it being sustainable, like if you're engaging on your 3 primary channels, audience curation, moderating, etc. So a year from now, what will success look like?
Right. So engagement rate is, the trend that we're following. If we're getting more people commenting and interacting and encouraging dialogue with our audience, then that to us is success. We also, as far as the app, if people are reopening and they are re-engaging with the museum and they're becoming more involved, either through email or becoming a follower or fan on our social platforms, we see that as a way to stay connected with people. We are collecting emails through the app too, so if we can get that deeper connection with our audience and stay in touch with them, and then they become members or they become, more involved with the museum, that's definitely a goal that our advancement department had in this new story model. So those are some of the key areas that we look at in terms of success. For us, our mission, educate and inspire. So if people are really excited by the content and come back to us and want to talk to us, that's the big goal.
Yeah, and we also, in addition to the engagement rate, which is really looking at the numbers, we also run a satisfaction survey every year on our primary social media platforms. So we can see this coming year, it'll be our third year of that survey. We can see how the ratings shift over time. And we might also, based upon just really refreshing how we're doing things, change some of the questions this year so that we're getting at more of how much of an impact this Stories First model has had.
Yeah, one of the jokes is that people come to our website to settle bar bets, because we have all the big, cool aviation and space stuff, and we have the facts and figures. So, if somebody's having an argument over which plane was faster, they can search us for that. But,
What bars are you hanging on?
Yeah, right. The really nerdy ones. I'm hanging out in the nerd bars. But yeah, so we want to be known, for our interpretation and ability to make some of these, amazing pieces of history more relatable to people and more relevant to what they care about today. So if we can do that, that's fantastic. Sorry, that's right. You had your hand up, and I'll get to you, Troy. Sorry.
Everyone, congratulations. I think the model of collaboration for connecting the stories is really something people should be inspired by.
Cool.
But I have one question. I have the impression that unless a lot of people share the stories on social media, nobody sees what you're posting or what some people are posting, and everything is made for you to sponsor the post. Do you sometimes sponsor your posts? Or?
Is that on social? Specifically sponsor on social?
Yeah, if there's something you really want people to see, that is perhaps something that people will not comment a lot, that will not get a lot of engagement, share.
Usually, if it's the question is, do you sponsor your posts or do you do something that you want people to see something? Star Trek being a good example, that whole model of everyone getting together and leveraging their different skill sets and influences is really important for those kinds of stories. If we have a big story that we want everybody to know, we get our communications folks, our PR folks, and anybody else, that can help lift that story, and we pull our resources to do that. So that has been effective. And then on social...
We haven't really gotten too much into sponsored posts yet. We did try some ads for our app, and we're going to continue to experiment with that. But it's often how we put the posts out there on social, kind of crafting the right message around it, picking the most compelling image from that story. And what's nice about having a lot more content to put out there is that we'll maybe put it out several times as a tweet and try to hit different audiences at different times and experiment with that to see kind of what are the most effective angles to put something out there. I think we have a pretty good sense at this point with our content what's going to naturally be most popular. There's certain aircraft, spacecraft, SR-71 Blackbird.
The winner. Star Trek.
We could put out a picture of someone dusting it, and that would get a lot of attention on it. So it's really just a challenge to us to kind of up our game in terms of how we put that content out there, how we help people see the so what of the content. Because it's there, it just might not be as obvious for some stories as others.
And I think, too, one piece, I've said a lot about creating new stuff, but we've built into the system a way to bring back old stuff, so when it's applicable, we can highlight really great stories that were popular and are then, somehow fit within the world scheme. we just did a post on Mariner 2 was featured in the Rose Bowl Parade. So I already have in the editorial calendar on the Rose Bowl Parade. Let's bring this back. So it's about just kind of keeping our ears to the ground and bringing up stuff that's relatable.
Yeah, and internally we refer to this layer of stories at the top of our website as an engagement layer. It's really an opportunity to plumb some of the really great stories that are already buried in our knowledge base of our collections, and bring those to the fore, rather than having to read through a really long essay of great material that has been written and stored about these objects. We can pull up those stories and then direct people to the deeper knowledge base if they're interested in more. Sorry.
Yeah, I think one really good example of that is there's an airplane that XP-59A that doesn't get much attention. It's kind of a drab color and can get overlooked. And buried within the object essay about it was a story about doing some flight testing of it, and they actually cut open part of the nose, stuck a guy in there to take readings during the flight. And that was just kind of a phrase buried in an object essay, but that's really catching to people. And so kind of pulling that out to the fore as a story, helps people connect with that object in a new way.
We're almost out of time, but I just wanted to call on Troy, because Troy's with Blue Cadet, and he worked with us on the website. They built our website, so yay, Blue Cadet.
It's really exciting to see how you're using the website and the app. And I know as we were working on the project, you had mentioned building a publishing team to feed this story piece. I'm kind of curious to hear more about the publishing team. How was it created, and what's the institutional kind of buy-in with that, and how does that work with the existing goals that you already have?
We have two teams, actually, that kind of spring to mind, but there's multiple teams kind of all over the place. The one that already existed was a group that met monthly and talked about content. And we really shifted them entirely to this story model because we kind of got off on other things. That meeting was sort of losing its identity and its purpose. And so that's a monthly meeting that Jenny runs to get new ideas about stories. And it's a combination of curators and educators and communications folks. And they've been engaged in digital engagement for a long time. So they've already had a vested interest in this. And then we kind of naturally had another growth of a team that came from weekly meetings we were having with our communications office, our visitor services folks, and our public programs who do our lectures. And we had all been combined in a new department together. And we've been having these meetings, but again, we didn't have this really central purpose to gather around. This story model has given us that purpose. And so that's really what generated this new process. And so every week we're just going in there and brainstorming ideas. So it's much more effective, I think. Are there other teams that I'm missing?
There's not other teams, but there's a nice, it's very fluid, and it's part of it is just taking the pressure off some people to say, listen, you don't have to write something, just talk to me and I'll write it for you. Let me interview you, or let me harass you in the hallway. So it's like we're kind of hustling every day. Yeah. And we're just like, so what's happening in your office today? You want to talk about it? I secretly take notes. So yeah, so we have these core teams who are contributing to content, but then it's also just really fluid in what comes up.
Some of the best stories come from hallway conversations, and there's a lot of things that folks do at our museum that they think probably the public wouldn't be interested in. I mean, dusting the artifacts is a really interesting story. Yeah. It's not, straightforward. So, and people love those kind of things. So, anyway, anyone else? Sorry. Oh, hi.
I had a question about
We're over.
process.
If anybody needs to leave, sorry.
A lot of times when you're trying to have these kinds of conversations, people get very fixated on object-based thinking.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about how you made that mind shift for people.
It's a good question, and there's a debate within our education office about object-based learning and all of that. So the question was, how do you shift from thinking solely around the object to thinking in a different way about the human interest stories, about other ways of looking at the history, and really the curators are tremendous at that. They're not entirely focused on just the objects. They're focused on the history and our archival professionals too. So there's already a lot of that in the museum. It really wasn't so much shifting everyone's, thinking in necessarily. It was leveraging the thinking they were already having. It was just that our website really evolved out of putting our collection online. So it necessarily grew around that, and you would have to know, okay, I want to search on the SR-71, and then I'll find this great story. And so really flipping the model became a natural next step. It really was about having the capacity to now start creating those stories and putting them out and working with the content professionals to do it. So I think for us it was pretty easy. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think the objects still provide such an important touch point, and you get back to that through the story. So it's a mindset shift, and it's really about building that new habit of kind of pulling out the stories first, and then the people who want to do the deeper dive can do that.
Thank you very much. We have to go because we have another presenter coming up.